So, communities and DAOs. I want to start with introducing our amazing speakers. I will let you guys introduce yourself. Daniel, why don't you start?
Okay. Yeah, my name's Daniel. I've been in crypto since 2017. Worked as regional manager for surfwear brands in Southern California for a long time. Been in the NFT space for a number of years now. Working with Futures Factory as their community manager. So we're creating a platform to onboard new designers in the space and creating a governance token with an NFT project that we're launching in February. And that'll act as, like I said, a governance token for people to act within the Futures Factory ecosystem. And that's me.
Thank you so much. Matt?
Hi everyone, my name is Matt, also known as a Diggy in the space. I'm being a director of London-based studio called Dcentral, as well as a co-founder of Hype Prime, which is probably the most oversubscribed collection in these days ever. Something created especially for a purpose to bring fashion brands into the Web3 space in this authentic way.
Hi, I'm Nova Lorraine. I'm a fashion designer currently working with data art, AI, and AR, and looking to bring couture into the future. I'm also the Chief Metaverse Officer of Lore, which is the bespoke metaverse, providing access, sustainability, and interoperability to small to mid-sized luxury and bespoke retailers.
Woo. Hi, I'm Jackie. I am founding BFF at BFF, and I am working on a project called Qualia, which is a community meant to sort of bridge Web 2 and Web 3 and the physicality between fashion, art, and sort of those intersections. My background is in fashion PR, consulting, and a little bit of, I still do some advising and angel investing.
Thank you so much. And I'm Nico Farah. I'm the founder of the Fashion DAO. So DAOs are so important to me. And I want to start with the definition of DAO or community. I would love to hear, because this is such a new topic and everybody has a different definition. Everybody is doing it through their own interpretation. I would love to hear from each of our panelists, how do you define community or DAO? Daniel?
Yeah, so a DAO is, I guess, a new way to create a decentralized version of normal operating businesses. So like what we're doing at Futures Factory is we're creating a decentralized way for people to have a say in who we onboard within our ecosystem, how we help launch their projects within our launch pads through our governance token of the NFT avatar collection, and being able to put their voice to the power of, giving these designers a platform where otherwise they wouldn't have had a voice kind of before, a decentralized manner.
My turn. Well, I might be a little bit different on this stage, because basically for me, DAO, it's still a wild west of the blockchain and Web3. It's all about the freedom. It's all about the power to community. But as you said, right, you try to bring this decentralized version of a normal operating business, while I'm just still trying to figure out in my head how this is going to work on a big scale. Because giving the power to community is one thing, right? But giving the power and managing your project and a company to a few thousand people, right, is actually a little bit different approach. So we know the DAO itself works well for the certain kind of scenarios. As you said, it's very new for the fashion, right? So I'm still trying to process how is this going to work, and if someone buy, I don't know, 20 pairs of Nike shoes, right? Is this going to own some sort of shares, in the Nike at the same time, right? It's a little bit of a conflict and a different approach, but as I said, it's new, and encouraging the communities and bringing much more of the DAO through that is the direction.
I'll jump in. I see DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, as the future of company infrastructures. Just as LLCs once upon a time was sort of poo-pooed or not looked at seriously compared to Incs, it became the new structure of choice for entrepreneurs. So similarly, DAOs, where the community manages and the information and funds are on the blockchain, I see that as being the future. And then communities, DAOs, I also think are going to lead the new vision of social networks. So someone had mentioned that in the last panel. So that's my thought around DAOs and community.
I'm just going to double tap that. I think that's correct. I think that DAOs, the challenging thing really when talking about them is similar to the challenges with NFT. Like they can encompass so many things. We don't have the right language yet. Is something like an investment DAO where everything's actually purely recorded on the blockchain? Is it more of a softer community where the community has voting rights? And I think that DAO has become a little bit of a way to sort of communicate this idea of a more engaged and more leveraged community. But I think there's a lot of confusion around it also, and I think that sort of the future will be unpacking those things. I think we all agree that decentralized organizations where there's more fluidity between consultants and advisors is the way. But I think the DAOs are sort of a heavy thing, big thing to unpack right now.
And I want to add, when we talk about decentralization, that doesn't mean flat. It's not ever a flat organization because it's not going to work because we are not equal, we are not the same. We all have different personalities, we all have different expertise. So what we learned at the Fashion DAO with experience is that you still want to have certain leaders for certain tasks. So there's so much that we can learn from past organizations. And the autonomous part is really just making things more efficient using these Web3 technologies. But then it's a spectrum, both from decentralization and the autonomous part, and then each founder or each group of founders decide how far they want to go, how far they want to push, how many challenges they want to resolve. And then how much they want to educate, because it's not just what we want, it's about communicating that with your community that you're empowering. So I would love to hear, yes?
I was saying hi to my friend.
I thought you want to add. But how do you guys differentiate your communities that you have built? Tell us more about what differentiates your communities. How did you do that? A couple of secret sauce you can share.
The secret sauce. Okay. So the cool thing about Futures Factory is like Nicholas and his team have been around for years, since 2018, I believe. So they've had long-standing relationships of over 70 plus designers and creatives that they have contact with. So in developing Futures Factory, we were able to onboard a lot of those people who've been in the space, whether in the Web 2 and physical communities, and kind of bridging them into Web 3 and showing them like different ways that they can explore their creatives and have different avenues and outlets of ways of creativity that they otherwise wouldn't have had before. And then starting, you're big on Twitter Spaces, so curating these communities. Like we started Twitter Spaces back in November with Fashion Friday, which everybody loves Fashion Friday now, and it's great. So. Yeah, it's been really fun, and that's kind of how we've kind of curated that, is creating those conversations. You were one of the first people I spoke with the Fashion DAO, and seeing you guys in the community you've built kind of dive headfirst into that and being a part of that. I think kind of holding each other's hands, I guess, in a way, and just kind of building each other up instead of like being competition to each other, I think has been beneficial to all of us up here.
Yeah, that's the beauty of Web3. Like, I think the fashion industry before was very competitive. The fashion houses would not share anything. It was all secret. But we are all supportive of each other. Like the Fashion Fridays being the examples. It's like you respect other people's times. You're not going to overlap. And these are beautiful. Matt, what about you?
It's actually like, I really like this question. It seems to be relatively easy, but at the same time, it's quite difficult to answer, right? In between differentiating the communities, because you can only tell about the communities that you know of and you're being part of them, right? If you don't belong to those different crowds, you don't know what's happening. So at the same time, like, what's in front of you. But what I was going to say about this particular stuff, as we all sit on the stage, we run a different kind of the projects, and we've got a different approach to our communities. And also by approaching them from a different angle, our communities are being either based all around the product, around the designer as a person, around maybe another event. But what differentiates us from the other people is, well, we've got a bunch of guys extremely ambitious young people who wants to be a part of the whole fashion and the digital fashion movement. And many of them, from approaching the space, by the community, actually wants to become digital designers, right? So at the same time, you're curating one stuff, you've got a project, but at the same time, you do the new breed of the fashion designers and bring more people to the space. You give them a platform to express their voice.
So would you say HAPE is a community of fashion designers?
No, it's not a community of fashion designers. It's definitely a community of fashion enthusiasts with a lot of designers on the board because, we were the first guys with the fully 100% whitelist meta. In between that, many of those people, they're actually the skilled designers, and we want to give them a space, as speaking of our marketplace launch, and how it's going to evolve, we want to give them a space to be a part and participate in the project, but at the same time, contribute to the project as well.
Thank you so much. Noah?
I love the comments earlier made about how early we are with DAOs, and it sounds really great, but there are some disadvantages. About a year ago, I joined a DAO as a team lead, and so very different than being just part of the community. And in terms of the question regarding how to create the community and how I do our current community, I think then, about a year ago, it was really anyone that was interested in the idea of making money around crypto, join this DAO. And if you loosely are interested in this topic. And so I feel that at that time, there was a lot of just outreach to the general public, and then whoever decided to come in. And then what was seen from an infrastructure standpoint, that did create issues as it related to voting. And if you're not passionate about the mission or the goal of that project, are you going to participate? And I think that's really important. We're now, in contrast, how we're building our community with Lore, it's very personalized outreach. It's very specialized. So it's understanding who your true target customer is, just like anything. And so if you're a customer, I see that red jacket, which I love. So if your customer loves red, then give them red items. If your customer loves red and likes to go out at night, create that information and content and education around that to benefit that individual and that community member. And so now we're bringing in individuals that are aligned with the mission, with the goal of being educated around retail, meta commerce, doing fashion business within a 3D environment. And it's very specific, but those that are joining the community are passionate about fashion, passionate about future tech. And so they're there to be a participant. They're there to be engaged. And then, yes, the value is a bonus. That's the icing on the cake. But I think now I see a lot more DAOs really doubling down on their infrastructure, looking at what works in your traditional centralized organization. What do you like from that? Bringing that into the DAO infrastructure, but then also really laser focusing on who is that ideal member they want as part of that community. Do they want 1 million so-so interested individuals, or do they want 100 passionate individuals that are going to contribute, build, and grow that community?
Thank you.
Oh, geez. I think that for me, I think that it's the scope of what you want to create, right? No, not all communities are created equally. So with Qualia or with BFF, it's meant to be extremely broad in terms of the education and the onboarding. In terms of Qualia, it's by application, and the idea is to create this very close-knit group of people across Web 2 and Web 3 that are really, really focused on fashion and art. I think one of the challenges in Web 3 right now is that that model doesn't have a great place. A successful quote-unquote project as it relates to a DAO is something that sells out, that trades quick, that has volume, and people build in those things into their mechanics. And I think that can be detrimental to the idea of building a curated group. But I think ultimately it's the type of group you want to create, the size, how much do you want people to be involved? And then I think to sort of, emphasize sort of the structural issues, I think that it's, again, that, if the highest person can pay for a ticket, right, is that the way we want to curate membership? And so I think that those are the things that we also have to figure out.
Yeah, so basically building the culture. So you are not only building a startup, but also you're making it decentralized, and that's not an easy thing because you no longer have as much authority as a founder or CEO, and people are not clear on what it means. As we said, the definitions are different. So you're basically setting up yourself for a lot of challenges. What we found helpful is the part about transparency. I mean, everybody says we have to be transparent in Web3, but it actually takes a lot of work. Because in traditional organizations, you didn't have to like communicate every single thing you do. You can just close the doors and make decisions, and then people will be impacted by the outcome. But when we're talking about DAOs, it's really up to us, the founders, to like communicate every single important factor. So at the Fashion DAO, we've been hosting Zoom calls like every week, having everyone on it, and it is quite challenging, honestly, to be responsive to every single person. And any decision you're making, you have to involve everybody. And so you do need to put a structure into it, but it's extra work that you have to take on if you want to be transparent. The other factor that differentiated the Fashion DAO was inclusivity. There are other DAOs or communities that have a very high price gate fee. We don't have that. So things like that, I think if you are targeting to empower, it's about your goals. If you're empowering designers, then you don't want to like price it so high that you can't even invite them. But if you are just looking to invest, that's a different structure. So talking about, if you are targeting a lot of people and there's this factor of anonymity in the Web3 space, and then, of course, we talked about decentralization. With these challenges that are now introduced to you guys as you're building these communities, how do you still build the culture? How do you protect the culture from going it into a wrong way when you don't know who is behind that PFP, when you don't have as much authority as before?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm glad you mentioned the anonymity part because I was going to talk about that too. I do a lot in like the PFP side of like Web3 and NFTs and everything, which is very different from like the fashion world of Web3. Like the fashion side, everybody's doxxed, everybody meets together, everybody like video calls, Zoom calls, Discord calls, and meets like in real life, face to face, where the other side, like I used to run a dev studio and like we would work with projects and we would never see their faces. Or even like when we'd have in real life meetups, people just like wouldn't tell you who they were and then you'd find out later that they were those people. But that's where I think like the fashion side kind of stands out more, is like people want to have those personal relationships within those communities. And like you mentioned, just kind of supporting each other kind of through that walking way. And yeah, that's just one way that like we've met with you, we've met with Clubhouse, I've met with Stacky, like I've met with all those people who take the time out of their day to be like, hey, this is my face, this is what I'm working on. It builds trust and it builds those relationships. Not saying being anonymous doesn't, but I've worked with some anonymous people that haven't really worked out in like the best world of things. But I think over time, like I was anonymous for a little bit before I got into like, I guess into like more like real life events and everything. And over time you're like, all right, I've already told half these people my name and like where I live in Florida pretty much. So it's like, why am I still anonymous? If I'm building a brand or if I'm building a community around myself or around Futures Factory or just whatever, I think it's important to kind of build that extra trust factor. And I think eventually within Web3, the anonymity part will eventually kind of go away, especially when we start onboarding a lot of like Web2 people because they're not used to being anonymous anyways. So I think it'll be comfortable for them or just like normal to not be so anonymous.
I mean, it's funny you say it. Fashion industry, everyone is dogs. I'm also I started from a PFP kind of a situation, right? And from my angle, I went completely doxed from the day one because I believe, as you said, there must be a trust behind the person, especially in these days where people don't invest in the project, they invest in the teams. So whoever is going to put the money on your product, they need to know that the team who stands behind is really able to execute the vision that you basically put on. Speaking of losing the authority, I don't know if I can agree on that, right? That depends on the community and how your community respects you, right? So for example, speaking of DAO and having 10,000 people, right? That will have the right of vote, right? On the decisions and the direction that the company or the IP brand is heading to, is one thing, right? But I also believe, right, the correct structure, as you guys mentioned previously, is important, right? You've got all of those people, and then form a special council, someone with the right expertise. You've got those people in your community as a holders. So people from the right expertise, that actually achieve something in the real life, trying to build the Web3 with you. Put the stuff, you might have a voting, you might have a suggestion box, you might have whatever, right? The council might basically discuss it and also speak as a one consolidated voice, right? So we don't go into the chaos. But yeah, it's interesting, right? In general, I believe everyone should be doxed, and that would potentially help the space grow and be much more mature, for the future of Web3. It's going to change within a time. KCI will be a thing.
I mean, we don't have to talk too much about the anonymity. That wasn't so much the point. I think I just want to learn from you guys kind of how do you build the culture in this new form. So if you guys have any thoughts, obviously building culture is hard to begin with, but now you have these new constraints. So I'm just curious, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, and I do think from a culture building standpoint, looking at infrastructure, as you were just mentioning, is super important. And if you're starting from an anonymous profile, that could affect your culture, absolutely. But I think also, going back to the point of infrastructure and seeing, my background is in clinical psychology. We are all humans. We have the same fears. We have the same desires, right? And we want to be inspired, and we want to be given direction and guidance. And so when you're building your community, one, as that founder or team of founders, set the pillars of what you stand for. And then that is going to attract certain individuals. Maybe have an application process. I mean, these are tools that have worked in the past that we don't have to throw away, right? As was just mentioned, find those individuals that are most active in your community, bring them up into leadership roles. And have these if you have a large community like 10,000 or plus, or even over 100, it's still a lot, create these councils of governance.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's kind of difficult because when we had our Discord rolling on a full speed, Discord stopped giving us extension at 500,000, right? We're talking crazy numbers, right? And if you have such a big community, and people around your product or project, right? It's a challenge. It's actually a challenge.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I just wanted to add that as a founder or founding team, this is your baby that you're bringing to life. It's your vision. It's your mission. That doesn't change either. And you want to do something that you love, and you want to attract a community that you really want to engage with and participate with. So again, look at some attributes from a traditional centralized organization that you can bring in. And it's, again, human behavior. Bring those rewards in, bring those incentives in, bring those right personalities in to lead, and then create these bubbles of mini governance so you can have those decisions made quickly and have voting in a way where it still benefits the ultimate mission and goal of the DAO.
I mean, yeah, I was going to say, I think in this space, right, it depends how and where you're operating, but certainly in fashion, the arts and things, the technology is the infrastructure to empower, whether that is through a new manifestation of creative, right? Instead of this, I'm going to have some fire-breathing version in the metaverse, or because I'm going to create a new idea of what fandom is. So there's more symbiosis between someone that's starting something and someone that is patroning it. But I think that the technology isn't always the point. And so the tokens knit people together. They give some sort of secondary value, some sort of tangential, non-direct way of participating in a non-investment standpoint in the entity of a company and its health. But I think ultimately community building is really no different. You're trying to articulate the amount of people you want to manage. I actually think one of the biggest challenges are really successful projects that have humongous communities that then are having to dial back, right? Not dial back, but understand how to cater to them. Whereas when you're starting something, you can throttle it. For me, I'm like, we want it to be very small. Qualia should be like 500 people because otherwise we can't give them sort of like the Zoom calls and sort of the hand-holding that we want. Yeah.
So the way we are tackling it at the Fashion DAO, now we learned that we have to have different tiers. So not everybody has to be involved into the day-to-day operations, and not everybody has the resources to do so. So for that, we have a separate tier for the core contributors, so they're kind of like co-founders of the organizations. The second tier will be our broader community of creators, which we will tap into for every project that we have. And then the third tier are our supporters or traditional like community holders that we have. And so I think in that perspective, we can still be open to folks who want to be anonymous. For that third tier, the only thing is that they still need to follow our code of conduct. We cannot tolerate bad behaviors because it will impact, one bad apple will impact the whole community. So we still need to manage, but I think it will be more manageable, like Jackie said, if you have a very focused core team that you handpicked. And by that is not that we are excluding people, is that we're just picking people that are more aligned with our values and vision. And my last question for you all is, as you have been building communities and DAOs, what have you seen missing in terms of the tools that exist? We say Web3 is supposed to help us, empower people and make this possible to have decentralized organizations. But we all know it's a process. It's still work in progress. DAO tools are being developed. What did you feel would be helpful, just a wish list? If that exists, that would be great.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with just trust in the people who are running different organizations. Obviously, we've seen the whole FTX thing that has taken down a huge portion of exchanges and earn programs and stuff within the industry. A lot of these companies that you thought were transparent end up not being transparent. I lost money in Gemini, I know someone who lost 200 grand sitting in BlockFi because of that. And I think another part is also just like onboarding and education. It's not easy. For us, it's easy because we've been in the space for a long time to create crypto wallets and understand how blockchain works, how to understand reading Etherscan and all that. But when you're bringing somebody in, it's very daunting to be able to explain this to them. And a lot of time, it just kind of turns people away. Where there are certain companies within Web3 that are kind of creating that onboard process, but having people interact with blockchain without understanding they're interacting with blockchain. So it's not changing anything from what they're doing now, makes them curious, and then be able to transition into more technical aspects of things in an easier manner. I think Recur does a great job. You could sign up on their platform just with an email address and then get your NFT. And then if you want to send it to your decentralized wallet, you can do it. So there's a lot of platforms opening up like that. Magic Link is another great thing that has allowed people to kind of do that also. So tools like that, I think, are important, and I think having people at the forefront who are honest and transparent, which is always difficult to know who is, because Sam was, the godfather of all holiness within the space, and then a lot has come out that not so much.
Thank you. Are you using any specific tool for managing your community, or is it mostly Twitter and Discord?
Right now, mostly Twitter and Discord. We have several people on our marketing team that are kind of around the clock. It helps that I'm in the United States and the rest of the team is in Paris, so we're always available kind of within that. And as we continue to grow, adding different moderators and stuff to kind of make sure anything weird happens kind of within this space.
Is there something that you feel is missing in your toolbox where it would help you to manage the community more effectively?
That's a good question. I don't know.
For the rest of the panel.
I don't know. Can we have a magic button? Because speaking of digital fashion in general, right? It's interesting because it can go both ways. Digital fashion can stand on its own without blockchain, but digital fashion, because of the blockchain and the Web3, has its own accelerator and incubator that is really needed, right? in the last few years, because of the COVID and everything, right? The digital fashion itself, it became a big thing. Speaking of the tools that we like, I actually don't have anything particular. I would say like magic button. If something exists that could onboard half world, to Web3 space without even knowing them, they already been onboarded. That would be a dream scenario. But those kind of tools don't exist in these days, right? What we can encourage, there's existing stuff. So as we all believe in the blockchain and we believe in the technology behind it, we should be encouraging the tools that can be created on the blockchain to support our visions. Same with going outside of the blockchain, right? Onboarding new people by the traditional media, speaking of the AR, the mixed reality, all of the stuff, that goes along, and basically improves on the quality of the products that we show in the digital world. Also, like speaking of the whole digitalization of the physical products, right? The near field communications and stuff like that, right? A few days ago, it was called the Bluetooth, right? As we do .com on the steroids, right? It actually feels like the technology also comes back like a fashion, right? It just comes back within a bigger blast, more explosions, and then yay, move along.
Yeah, in terms of my experience with tools, I don't think we're there yet in terms of what we need for DAOs and managing the community. I mean, I've used Discord, which of course grew due to the gamers using that, but it's not the perfect platform, especially for onboarding web tours. You have a huge drop off as it relates to Discord. And then Telegram, which was great when you have a smaller community, but gets very messy very quickly. And then I've seen communities migrate for more intimate conversations on WhatsApp, which again, the more you use WhatsApp, the noisier that gets. But some tools that have helped, Miro, if you are as a community collaborating, that's a great one. Zoom has added a whiteboard feature to their product as well. So if you're doing video calls, you can whiteboard in real time, which I thought was very helpful. Notion is a great way of tracking projects and team leads. And, it's sort of like a cross between Airtable and what's the other one? Asana. So there are great project management tools, and you kind of have to see, again, going back to what Nico was mentioning, when you have your core team, what is going to be used the most by the core team? Because we've used and added a lot of tools, but then half of them aren't used. And so technology is great when it empowers you and it makes things more efficient, but you don't just add tools just because you have the ability to. So really look at that core team and what are they going to use the most? What are their needs? Are they all over the world? Are they local? And then choose your tools that way. But there are some great project management tools and real-time collaboration tools, which I think is efficient for managing DAO communities. But my wish is a replacement to Discord. I'm sorry, Discord serves the purpose, the original purpose, but I think, again, as it relates to managing a community that you're onboarding from Web 2, there are some challenges there.
Can I just ask a question very, very quickly? Because the software you mentioned, like all of Asanas, right, and stuff like that, they are very heavy, like the management tools, for a Web 2. How do you potentially see, like, bringing those into Web 3 space? Is there any concrete vision?
I don't think you need to worry about being on chain with your core team. Like, there's a lot of things that we still can carry on from Web 2, and this project management tool is an example, but also there are similar ones like Wonderverse. So instead of Asana, you can use Wonderverse. There's the D-Work. So there are equivalents that are being created. But I also don't think like there is any problem with using, for example, Slack for communication. Not everything has to be on chain, guys. Like not everything, like we don't need the gas fees for every conversation. Hey, can you check this? Like, why does this need to be on chain? So yes, when we are making proposals, when we are doing serious stuff, maybe it's a good idea. But even like if you think about like the actual infrastructure too, like marketplaces, not every single aspect of it has to be on chain. You're adding a lot of more challenges, and that is not the part of transparency. That's not the point of Web3. Efficiency, I think, is the #1 important value that we're bringing to the fashion industry. And then, yes, for important stuff, you can still use transparency.
Cool.
I think there's a lot of good technology tools. I think they're being built right before we know what we need. I think voting mechanisms are good, like Juicebox and Upstream. There's good community management tools. I think what I would like to see, and perhaps it exists already, is like in Web 2 land, I think there's like a burgeoning sort of next genesis of the idea of the consultant. So you have these fractional CEOs, fractional CFOs, like high-level seated people that can then advise and help companies on a fractional basis. And I would love to find, I've talked to some of them, right? How do they enter this sphere? How do we make it so it's not super complicated? So some sort of like weighting system, like you were saying, excuse me, about how someone participates in something besides just sort of like mass voting on chain systems. I think, and then I think the biggest thing that surrounds the actual technology is how we onboard and educate around it. Because the biggest thing for me with DAOs is this idea of fluidity of work. The coolest thing I ever heard, maybe not the coolest thing, one of the coolest things I ever heard was, you know, in this current corp environment, you would never have someone work at Apple and like Microsoft. But like in a DAO infrastructure, like you could. And there would be more fluidity, and it would create more creativity and more ownership. And so how do we support that? I think right now it's primarily voting mechanisms and community management, but I think the next is, that's all.
And ownership fuels empowerment, and that's the parts that we can offer to our community. Again, when we look at our tiers, for example, in the Fashion DAO, the first tier, you will actually own the equity of the company, so you have a huge impact in the future of this. And then the second tiers will be part of the revenues that are being generated, the third tier as well. So it's up to you, again, how you define the ownership and the voting power that you are giving people. And it doesn't have to be flat, because people are not equal. And people have to prove themselves too. I think that's another factor that we didn't really touch on, but it's very important. The factor of just paying and getting in and then getting to the high level of voting, that does not work. It's going to destroy everything you have built. So you have to let people prove themselves, and money is not the proving point. There's so much more that needs to be proven. But thank you so much. I can't wait to see how this conversation will be next year, when our communities have grown and we better figured out DAOs. Thank you. Give it up for our amazing panel.
Thank you very much.